When I held up the photo, Emily froze. Her face turned pale, her eyes flickering between me and the damning image in my hand. "Where did you get that?" she stammered. I let out a sharp laugh. "Really, Emily? That's your first reaction? I show you undeniable proof of you wrapped around some guy, and all you care about is where I got it. Does it even matter? Will knowing the source change the fact that you're in his arms, kissing him like that?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Finally, she said, "I know how this looks, Adam, but it's not what you think. Yes, we kissed, but it didn't mean anything. Look at the photo, it's in the middle of a crowded dance floor. It wasn't private. It wasn't like that. So, that's your argument. That because it wasn't in some dark corner or a hotel room, it's fine. Do you even hear yourself right now?" Her voice softened, trying to sound reasonable. "Adam, please. You're overthinking this. It was one mistake, one stupid moment. It doesn't change how I feel about you. About us. Don't let this ruin everything we've built." I shook my head, the weight of her words pressing down on my chest. "One mistake. Innocent. You haven't even told me his name, Emily. Who is he?" She crossed her arms, defensive now. "Does it matter? If I tell you, you'll lose your temper and do something stupid. I won't let that happen." I clenched my jaw. "Wow. Thanks for your honesty, Emily. You've made your choice, and now I'll make mine." I turned away, walking upstairs as if on autopilot, the photo still clutched in my hand. I grabbed a suitcase and started shoving clothes into it, not caring if they were folded or crumpled. I just needed to leave. Footsteps followed me up the stairs. "Adam, wait. What are you doing?" Her voice cracked. "What does it look like?" "I'm packing." "But why? Where are you going?" "Because I need space. I need to think before I say something I'll regret." "You wouldn't hurt me," she said softly, almost pleading. "Until today, Emily, I thought the same about you, that you'd never hurt me like this. But here we are. Cheating. Who said I cheated?" She shot back, her voice rising with frustration. "Are you really doing this? Still denying it? After everything? It was just a kiss," she cried. "A stupid, meaningless kiss." "Meaningless." I pulled out another photo from my pocket, a closer shot. There was no misinterpreting it. "Explain this, Emily." She went pale, her lips parted but silent. Then she whispered, Where did you get that?" Unbelievable. Still asking where. As if the source of the photo changes what it shows. "It doesn't matter how I got it, Emily. What matters is that it's real. And you can't lie your way out of this one." Her shoulders sagged, and she dropped the photos onto the floor. She stepped closer, reaching out to me. "Adam, please. Please, just listen to me. It's not what you think. Stay back, Emily. Communication is a two-way street, and you've given me nothing but lies and excuses. I gave you a chance to come clean, to be honest with me. You threw it away. I might have been able to forgive you if you'd told me the truth, if you'd shown even a shred of remorse. But you didn't." I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. "If you ever call me again for anything other than an emergency involving Ethan, I'll block your number. Do you understand me?" She nodded weakly, tears streaking her face as she watched me walk away. The night air hit me like a slap as I left the house. I drove aimlessly until I spotted a small motel on the edge of town. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a hollow ache in my chest. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of loyalty, trust, and shared dreams, reduced to this. In the dim motel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone. There were no messages from Emily, but plenty from others. Our so-called friends. Cassidy, her best friend, had texted me multiple times, asking to talk, to sort things out. I scrolled through the messages, my stomach churning. They knew. They all knew something. Emily had clearly gotten to them first, shared her version of the story, twisted it into something that made her seem like the victim. Cassidy wanted me to meet everyone at her house on Sunday night. But the idea of sitting in someone's living room, surrounded by people who might have known about this all along, felt like a trap. I replied, suggesting we meet at Angus Steakhouse instead, a public place, neutral ground. If they wanted to talk, they'd do it on my terms. Surprisingly, Cassidy agreed. On Sunday, I parked my car carefully, making sure no one could block me in. The group had arrived early. They were seated in a private section of the restaurant, their faces tight with tension. The only open seat was next to Emily, but I wasn't about to sit there. I raised a hand as she started to stand up. Don't. I'll sit at the far end of the table. Cassidy spoke up quickly. Of course, Adam. Jared, can you switch seats with him? I sat down, ignoring the menu, and went straight to the point. I pulled 2 copies of the photo from my pocket and slid them down both sides of the table. You all say you care about fixing this, about helping Emily and me sort things out. But look at this picture. Look at him. Someone here knows who he is. If you really want to help, start by being honest. The silence was suffocating. Eyes darted around the table, but no one spoke. Not Cassidy, not Jared, not anyone. That's all I needed to know. I pushed back my chair and stood. Enjoy your dinner. Someone can have my steak, I've lost my appetite. As I walked away, Emily's voice followed me, trembling, desperate. But no one else called after me. Not Cassidy, not Jared. None of them. They weren't my friends. They were hers. At the motel, I grabbed some fast food and went home. I paid the babysitter, thanked her, and moved my belongings into the spare bedroom. The house felt cold, hollow. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Over the weekend, I went to the hardware store and bought 2 locks identical to the ones on our front and back doors. I installed them on the spare bedroom and hallway bathroom doors, keeping both keys for myself. This wasn't to avoid another argument with Emily, it was to prevent her from sneaking into my space, trying to seduce me in the middle of the night or catching me off guard in the shower. Once I was settled, I spent the evening with Ethan. My son's laughter, his innocent joy, was the only thing anchoring me in that chaotic storm. After I bathed him and put him to bed, I sat quietly in his room, watching him sleep, tears silently streaming down my face. Emily must have seen my car in the garage when she got home around 10. I don't know where she had been, and honestly, I didn't want to know. Whether she had been with him or with her group of scheming friends didn't matter anymore. She came upstairs, excitement bubbling in her voice as she spotted me in Ethan's room. But I silenced her with a simple wave of my hand, not wanting her presence to disrupt my son's peaceful slumber. After closing Ethan's door, she tried to hug me. I stepped back. She plastered a smile on her face, pretending nothing had happened. I'm so glad you're home, Adam. Let me make you something to eat. We have so much to talk about. I shook my head. I'd already eaten, and I wasn't in the mood for small talk. So where have you been all this time, Emily? Entertaining your lover again? Her smile faltered. No, Adam. I was with our friends. At the steakhouse. You can ask them, they helped me find the right words to fix this mess. I sighed heavily. I'll talk to you when you're ready to give me his name. If you can't do that, then we have nothing to say to each other. Her face fell as if I had struck her. I can't, Adam. I can't. That was all I needed to hear. You can't. You'd rather protect him than salvage our marriage? I'll stay in the spare bedroom. Don't come near me. Don't touch me. And don't speak to me unless it's to tell me his name. Who knows what diseases you might have brought back with you. But I won't let your actions keep me from my son. He needs me, even if you don't. She turned away, her shoulders trembling as she disappeared down the hallway. The silence in the house that night was deafening. For the next week, Emily and I became ghosts haunting the same space. We spoke to Ethan, played with him, and acted normal for his sake. But between us, not a single word was exchanged. The air was thick with unspoken words and mounting resentment. On Monday evening, I came home from work expecting another silent dinner. But something felt off the moment I walked through the front door. Voices, muffled, low, came from the kitchen. I stepped in and froze. A crowd of people stood there, their faces plastered with awkward smiles. It was our friends. Cassidy, Jared, and the rest of the usual group. They had gathered in my home without so much as a warning. My first question was simple. Where's Ethan? Emily stepped forward. He's at the babysitter's. He's staying there for the night. We wanted to talk to you, Adam, properly. I raised an eyebrow. Interesting. You all planned this without me. And I didn't see your cars outside. Cassidy spoke up. We parked a block away. We wanted to make sure you wouldn't just drive off if you saw us here. The pieces clicked together. They had coordinated this ambush. All right. Fine. What's this all about? Emily smiled nervously. Why don't we go into the living room, Adam? It'll be easier to talk there. I excused myself briefly, heading to the bathroom. Before returning, I started a recording on my phone and slipped it into my shirt pocket, the camera lens barely visible. I wasn't taking any chances. When I walked into the living room, two unfamiliar faces caught my attention. Sitting casually among the group was a man, tall, sharp-featured, and beside him, a younger woman who radiated an unsettling confidence. Emily cleared her throat and began. Adam, you've met everyone here except Elliot Franklin and his wife, Gail. They've been part of our circle for a long time, but somehow, you've never crossed paths before. We thought it was time to fix that. Elliot leaned forward slightly, wearing an expression that screamed arrogance disguised as charm. Adam, I know this might be overwhelming. But you wanted answers. Well, here we are. No more secrets. Cassidy chimed in quickly. Adam, we're all here to make sure no one loses their temper tonight. We want a civil conversation. Elliot is here to talk to you directly. I stared at the man sitting across from me. So this was him. The man who had shattered my marriage. The man Emily was protecting so fiercely. Elliot stood, extending his hand. Adam, can I call you Adam? I hope we can be civil and respectful as we discuss this. I didn't move an inch. My arms stayed at my sides. You can call me Mr. Wilson. We aren't friends, and I'd like to keep it that way. His hand dropped awkwardly, but his smirk didn't falter. Fair enough, Mr. Wilson. I'd like to explain how this all happened. Maybe offer some clarity. I gestured for him to continue, already disgusted by his presence. He spread his arms wide as if giving a presentation. Look around, Mr. Wilson. What do you see? A room full of attractive people, men and women. Do you think that's a coincidence? Friendships like these often blur lines, boundaries shift. Every couple here has a bond built on trust, openness, and exploration. I clenched my jaw as he continued. Take my wife, Gail. She's everything to me, and no man here could ever take her away. That security allows us to share experiences, to grow. Monogamy is outdated, Mr. Wilson. Love isn't limited to two people. It's bigger than that. I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. How convenient for you, Elliot. But none of this has anything to do with me, or Emily. Whatever this is, it wasn't discussed with me. You crossed a line. Elliot raised his hands in mock surrender. I understand this is difficult for you, Mr. Wilson. But think about it. Imagine the freedom, the trust, the connection you could have if you embraced this instead of fighting it. I shook my head, the bile rising in my throat. This man had seduced my wife and was now trying to sell me on some grand philosophy to justify it. My voice was low and sharp. You can keep your philosophy, Elliot. And you can keep Emily too. Because whatever this is, it's not love. And it sure as hell isn't trust. Elliot's voice dripped with confidence as he continued explaining his twisted philosophy, hands gesturing as if he was giving some grand motivational speech. He claimed Emily had been planning to discuss everything with me, that she wanted to explain how this experience could supposedly strengthen our marriage. But, according to him, I jumped to conclusions, cornered her with accusations, and left her no room to speak. Apparently, she had panicked and shut down because of the hostile environment I'd created. I crossed my arms, staring straight at Emily. Is this true? Did you really plan this entire thing behind my back, discuss it with them, and then agree to test the waters with Elliot without so much as a single conversation with me beforehand? Emily hesitated for a second before nodding. Her voice was small, fragile. I'd heard how much stronger marriages become when couples explore outside connections together. I thought it could help us, Adam. I thought it could bring us closer. Elliot told me how it had improved other relationships, and I believed him. Please, believe me when I say my love for you has never changed. I wanted to bring something back to us, to show you what I learned, and maybe you'd see the value in it too. Her attempt at a sweet smile only fueled the fire inside me. So, what was I supposed to believe? That one magical session with this self-proclaimed relationship guru had turned her into some kind of expert overnight? That it was all just innocent experimentation? Her eyes dropped to the floor, her silence speaking volumes. Elliot jumped back into the conversation, his voice smooth and persuasive. Mr. Wilson, you're focusing on the wrong things. What Emily and I shared wasn't about betrayal, it was about growth. About exploration. And now, you have the same opportunity. You could join us, learn from us, and experience the same kind of enlightenment. You'd be surprised by the benefits this arrangement offers, benefits you might not even have considered yet. My stomach churned. This guy actually believed he was some kind of savior, swooping into marriages and fixing them through his so-called experience. I stared at Emily again, my voice steady. When have I ever resisted trying something new in our marriage, Emily? When have I ever shut you down when you wanted to talk about us, about intimacy, about ways to improve our connection? If you thought our relationship needed something, why didn't you come to me first? Why did you go to him? Her reply was barely above a whisper. You're gentle, Adam. You're kind. And I love that about you. But sometimes I wanted something different. Something more forceful, more raw. Elliot gave me that. But it didn't mean he replaced you in my heart. He's nothing like you. I felt my jaw tighten as her words sank in. Everything inside me screamed to lash out, to tell them both exactly what I thought of their excuses, their philosophies, their pathetic attempts to justify what they'd done. But I didn't. Outwardly, I stayed calm, collected. Inside, though, a storm was raging. Elliot leaned forward, his smile unwavering. Adam, can you see now? This isn't about taking something away from you, it's about giving you more. More connection, more intimacy, more freedom. Don't let your pride hold you back from something that could transform your marriage. I forced myself to smile, a cold, calculated expression. I appreciate your insight, Elliot. But this is a lot to take in. Emily and I need time to discuss this privately, just the two of us. Once we've talked things through, we'll let you know where we stand. His smirk faltered slightly. He wasn't expecting that. He wanted an answer now, wanted me to give in and validate his nonsense. But I wasn't going to make it that easy for him. Elliot nodded slowly. Take your time, Adam. We want this to be a positive experience for both of you. Before I could turn to leave, 3 of the larger men from the group grabbed me, one on each arm and one standing in front of me. I wasn't hurt, but the suddenness of it caught me off guard. Emily walked up to me, avoiding my eyes as she reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out my phone. She tapped through it, her expression stone-cold as she deleted the recording I'd been making. Adam, please understand, she said quietly. We need to trust you, but right now, we can't afford to take any chances. We can't let anything from tonight be recorded or shared. Elliot nodded approvingly. It's nothing personal, Adam. But trust is earned, and right now, you're still an outsider to our circle. Don't let this discourage you, we believe you'll come around in time. The group started to leave after that, their little summit apparently over. Emily lingered for a moment, her hand lightly touching my arm. I shrugged her off and walked away. In the garage, I grabbed my keys. Emily followed, her voice soft but persistent. Where are you going, Adam? Can't we just talk? Can't we start over tonight? I was hoping we could reconnect. I turned to her briefly. I'm going to pick up Ethan. Unlike you, I miss my son. She didn't follow me after that. At the babysitter's house, Ethan greeted me with a squeal of delight. I hugged him tightly, feeling a brief moment of peace in the chaos. On the way home, he chattered about everything and nothing, completely unaware of the emotional wreckage his mother and I were navigating. Back at the house, Emily was in the kitchen, preparing something light to eat. She offered me a plate, but I shook my head. I grabbed a steak dinner at a nearby restaurant, savoring every bite as I processed everything that had happened. That night, Emily cornered me in the hallway. "Adam, earlier, you seemed interested in Elliot's offer. But then you shut down. What happened?" I sighed. "Let me ask you something, Emily. Just answer honestly. Earlier, when those men grabbed me in my own home, did you say a single word to stop them?" She hesitated. "No. When you took my phone and deleted my recordings, did I ask you to do that?" She looked down. "No. And when you agreed to all of this arrangement, this plan, did you do it knowing how much it would hurt me?" She didn't respond. "You didn't stand up for me, Emily. Not once. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." I turned and walked into the spare bedroom, locking the door behind me. Hours later, I heard her trying to turn the handle, trying to get in. But the lock held. The next morning, I called Dan, my company's vice president. "Dan, I need the name of a good divorce attorney. One who'll fight as hard for me as he will for her." Dan's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Adam, please tell me this isn't about you." "It is, Dan. It's time." He promised to connect me with someone who could help. The next chapter had begun. Dan's voice on the phone was calm, professional, but with an edge of genuine concern. He gave me the name of a highly recommended divorce attorney, Beatrice Thorne. I called her office and managed to secure an appointment for 2:30 that afternoon. Beatrice wasn't what I expected. Despite the professional sharpness in her voice, there was a warmth there too. She explained that while her caseload was heavily weighted toward female clients, once she took on a case, she fought tooth and nail, regardless of gender. It didn't take long to convince her that my case was worth fighting for. She listened patiently as I laid everything out, nodding thoughtfully as I explained my position. Her conclusion was blunt: I would likely be paying child support until Ethan turned 18, possibly longer if college expenses were factored in. Alimony was a different beast, though. In our state, the general rule was 1 year of alimony for every 2 years of marriage, up to a maximum of 10 years. Given our income disparity, she said I'd probably be looking at around 5 years. The thought of paying Emily to continue her little adventures with men like Elliot made my stomach churn, but I swallowed the bitterness. Ethan deserved stability, and I'd make sure he had it. I told Beatrice I wanted shared custody, either alternating weeks or some other fair arrangement. She couldn't promise specifics but assured me she'd fight for my rights as a father. As for the house, she explained that rental agreements made things simpler. We wouldn't have to sell or divide property. Ethan was still young, and stability mattered more than location. Emily could stay in the rental if she wanted, and I wouldn't lose sleep over it. There was no way I'd ever step foot in that master bedroom again anyway, not after knowing what had happened there. Beatrice was efficient. If I gave her the green light, she could have the paperwork ready for Emily to be served by Friday morning, at her workplace. I requested exactly that. I wanted her colleagues, her friends, her little circle of enablers, to see her mask slip when reality hit. Before wrapping up, I asked about living arrangements until the divorce was finalized. Could I legally remain in the same house? Beatrice explained that it wasn't uncommon, but it could be emotionally draining and legally risky. If Emily made any claims about intimacy or reconciliation, even if they were false, it could reset the divorce timeline. The courts tended to favor the spouse who appeared more emotional, more vulnerable. I promised Beatrice I had no intention of falling into that trap. I could resist Emily's attempts to manipulate me. I'd already started locking doors and drawing boundaries. But Beatrice warned me again, Emily wouldn't need proof. All she'd have to do was cry in front of a judge and claim I'd come crawling back to her bed. It would be her word against mine, and the judge would likely believe her. As I left her office, I felt steady. Not hopeful, not happy, but steady. I had a plan, and I had someone in my corner. That evening, Emily was already home by the time I arrived. She was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, humming to herself like nothing had happened. I avoided her entirely, heading upstairs with a change of clothes to the hallway bathroom. I was building habits now, practicing how to live separately under the same roof. When I came back down, Ethan was already in his high chair, babbling happily as Emily set plates on the table. She turned to me, her smile forced. "You smell nice and fresh," she said lightly. I ignored her comment, sat down, and focused on my son. Dinner passed mostly in silence until Emily spoke. "Adam, I want to explain something about last night." "About the phone." I gestured for her to continue, keeping my face neutral. "While you were downstairs, Elliot told me he knew you were recording everything. He said it wasn't fair to the group to let those recordings exist, that it could put everyone at risk if they were shared. They weren't going to leave until they were sure the footage was gone. They said if I didn't delete it in front of you, they'd take your phone and clear it themselves." I kept my voice steady. "And they trusted you to handle that because I gave them my word." I stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. "Interesting. You gave them your word, Emily. But didn't you also give me your word on our wedding day? That you'd be faithful? That you'd be honest?" She looked down at her plate, saying nothing. I leaned back in my chair. "Tell me something, Emily. If the situation were reversed, if those men had grabbed you in our home, do you think I'd stand there silently and let it happen?" She hesitated. "It wouldn't have mattered, Adam. They're stronger than you. You couldn't have stopped them." "That's not the point," I said sharply. "I would have fought. I wouldn't have just stood there and let it happen. But you stood there and let them grab me. You deleted my recordings. You chose their side over mine." Her voice was weak now, almost a whisper. "I didn't see it that way." "That's because you didn't want to see it that way." The conversation ended there. I pushed my chair back and went upstairs, locking myself in the spare bedroom. Later that night, as I lay staring at the ceiling, I heard the doorknob rattle softly. She was trying to get in. 3 turns, maybe 4. But the lock held, and eventually, the sound stopped. The next day at work, Dan followed through on his promise. He gave me a name, a contact, and a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "This will stay between us, Adam. You've got this." When I got home that evening, Emily was waiting again. This time, her tone was softer, almost desperate. "Adam, please. Last night, it doesn't have to be like this. We could fix this, you know. Together." I stared at her, exhaustion etched into every line on my face. "Emily, do you honestly believe our marriage can survive this? After everything?" She didn't answer. The trust was gone. The damage was done. And no amount of philosophical nonsense from Elliot or hollow apologies from Emily could patch up the cracks in our foundation. I turned and walked into the spare bedroom, locking the door behind me once again. Emily's voice wavered as she tried to justify herself. She said she had hoped to experience everything first, to bring back what she had learned and somehow make our marriage better. She painted it as some grand experiment, a selfless act designed to elevate our connection. So, let me get this straight, I was supposed to sit here like a fool while she played out her fantasies with Elliot, and then, like some obedient dog, I'd be grateful for the lessons she brought back to me. The arrogance of it all was staggering. My voice dripped with sarcasm as I replied. "Oh, how lucky I must feel to have been given the privilege of benefiting from her enlightenment, delivered by the all-knowing Elliot. Clearly, I was just too simple-minded to understand such profound truths on my own." She flinched, her face flushing with embarrassment. Then, in an almost breathless rush, she tried a different tactic. "Let me show you, Adam. Let me show you what I've learned." I picked up some new techniques from Elliot. I watched Gail closely. "This is supposed to make us stronger, better. Please, just let me show you." The words made my stomach turn. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was him. His hands on her, his smirk, his arrogance. It wasn't something I could just erase with her offering herself up to me like some kind of consolation prize. "Every time I look at you, Emily, I feel nothing but disgust. And no, I'm not interested in seeing what you've learned." Her face twisted into something sharp, something defensive. You don't own me, Adam. You never did. I shook my head slowly. You're absolutely right, Emily. I never owned you. I thought you were mine because you gave yourself to me, because you promised. But now, you've taken that promise back and handed it to someone else. You've broken something in me, Emily, and I honestly don't know if it can ever be repaired. She started sobbing again, her shoulders shaking with each breath. It didn't move me. I had nothing left to give her emotionally. That was the last conversation we had until Friday. For the rest of the week, I focused entirely on Ethan. Every spare moment was spent with him, playing, laughing, feeding him, bathing him. I never asked Emily for help, and she seemed to understand that crossing into those moments was unwelcome. Ethan, blissfully unaware of the turmoil surrounding him, soaked up every ounce of attention, and I was grateful for the tiny slice of normalcy. During my downtime, I dug into public records, trying to learn more about Elliot and Gail Franklin. But they were ghosts. No social media presence, no background worth noting. The only Elliot Franklin I could find was a homeless man arrested for panhandling downtown. Clearly not the men who had smiled smugly at me in my own home. Friday morning arrived. Emily was served the divorce papers at her office, just as planned. I had intentionally scheduled a facilities management conference for the same morning, knowing my absence would prevent any immediate confrontation. My phone was on silent, and the only calls I planned to take were true emergencies. When I finally checked my messages, there were half a dozen voicemails from Emily. Her voice trembled between anger, frustration, and desperation as she demanded to know if I was serious, if I was really going to divorce her over something so meaningless. The last message was quieter, broken. I don't want a divorce, Adam. Please. Please don't do this. That evening, I stopped by a Chick-fil-A on my way home, knowing she probably hadn't cooked anything. When I pulled into the driveway, she was just getting home with Ethan. She rushed toward me as I carried our son inside, wrapping her arms around me while Ethan giggled between us. I didn't push her away, not in front of him. Dinner was quiet. Emily thanked me for the food, her voice soft and hesitant. Tears welled up in her eyes as she fed Ethan, her hands trembling slightly. After dinner, I spent the rest of the evening with our son, reading him stories until he drifted off to sleep. For those brief hours, everything else faded away. He was my focus. My reason for staying composed. Later that night, I found Emily sitting in the living room with the divorce papers spread out on the coffee table. Her eyes were red, her face pale. "I'm sorry, Adam," she said quietly. "Is that what you wanted to hear?" "It's the first apology you've given me since this all started," I replied. "But what are you sorry for, exactly?" She hesitated. "I'm sorry you had to find out about it the way you did. I'm sorry it hurt you." "So you're not sorry it happened, just sorry I found out." She started to protest, but I cut her off. "Elliot convinced you I'd come around eventually, didn't he? That I'd see the light, embrace your little club, and start sleeping with other women like it was some kind of enlightened utopia." She nodded slowly. "He said if I had approached you first, things might have been different. But I didn't, and now. I don't know. It's too late, Emily. You've done too much damage. There's no going back. You blew up our marriage, and now you want me to pretend it never happened. I can't." Her voice broke. "I know you, Adam. You don't want Ethan growing up in a broken home. You don't want him calling another man Dad. Think about this. Please. Reconciliation is the best option for all of us." I shook my head. "I don't want Ethan calling another woman Mom either, Emily. But you should have thought about all of this before you betrayed me. Not after." She looked defeated, tears spilling down her face. "I can change, Adam. I'll cut them all off, Elliot, Gail, the entire group. I'll never see them again. Please, let me fix this." The words washed over me, but they didn't sink in. They were just noise now. "I hear you, Emily. I just don't believe you. You've already proven you can lie to me, betray me, and hide it until you're caught." She stood there, silent, her face crumbling as reality started to sink in. "I'm staying here, Emily. For Ethan. But don't expect things to go back to normal. I'll handle my own laundry, my own meals, and my own life. You handle yours. And we'll both handle Ethan together. I walked past her, heading to the spare bedroom. I locked the door behind me, sinking onto the bed with a heavy sigh. There was no fixing this. Not anymore. Every conversation with Emily felt like walking through a field littered with emotional landmines. Her words were carefully chosen, her voice sweet yet calculated, and her smiles hollow. It was exhausting. I had drawn my line in the sand: no intimacy, no reconciliation, and no trust. We coexisted under the same roof, nothing more. Emily didn't seem to grasp the finality of my decision. She kept circling back, offering empty promises and tearful pleas, swearing she'd leave her group of friends, quit her job if necessary, and become a stay-at-home mom. But I saw right through it. It wasn't about fixing our marriage, it was about control, about keeping me on her leash while she figured out her next move. Weeks passed, and we established a fragile routine. Conversations were limited to what was necessary, usually about Ethan. Surprisingly, we managed to agree on a few things suggested by my attorney, Beatrice. I covered the rent while Emily took care of utilities. We paid for our own groceries and handled our car's expenses separately. I also transferred half of our savings into a separate account in my name, leaving the other half for her. Emily didn't take that well, but eventually, she accepted it. I could tell she was trying to chip away at me, subtly inserting herself into conversations, asking me about my day, or trying to remind me of happier times. But I stayed neutral. Polite, but distant. She wasn't going to charm her way out of this one. One afternoon, while searching my desk for a specific pair of socks, I realized something was missing. The photos, those photos. They were gone. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I checked every drawer, every folder. No trace. Then I noticed faint scratches around the lock on my bedroom door. Emily couldn't have picked that lock herself. She must have called a locksmith to duplicate the key. The thought made my blood boil. I replaced the locks on both my bedroom and bathroom doors the next day and kept the keys on me at all times. She thought she could sneak into my space without consequences, but now the game had changed. For the next few months, Emily continued to poke at the edges of my patience. Occasionally, she'd suggest going out to dinner or catching a movie together. Each time, I politely declined. Her invitations felt less like genuine gestures and more like calculated traps. Then came the calls and messages from her friends. Cassidy, Jared, even some people whose names I didn't recognize, they all reached out, inviting me to events, offering casual hangouts. Each number was blocked without a response. I wasn't about to let any of them drag me back into their twisted little circle. December crept closer, and with it came the usual round of holiday events. Emily invited me to her company Christmas party, something we used to attend together every year. I told her I couldn't make it, that I had promised to babysit Ethan. She went without me, and I felt a strange sense of relief knowing I wasn't there, surrounded by her fake smiles and carefully curated charm. The following weekend was my company's holiday party. I planned to go alone, but Emily must have followed me. She showed up at the venue, dressed to kill, with that same forced smile plastered across her face. She tried to make small talk with me, mingling among my colleagues, but I kept my distance. At one point, Dan, my vice president, pulled me aside. He chuckled lightly and asked if Emily and I had reconciled. I set him straight, firmly, but respectfully. He nodded in understanding, but I could tell he felt sorry for me. Pity wasn't something I wanted, but it was better than gossip. After the party, I drove straight to the babysitter's house, picked up Ethan, and brought him home. He was fast asleep in his car seat, and for those few quiet minutes on the drive home, everything felt peaceful. Emily returned later that night. She didn't argue, didn't cry. She seemed grateful. Grateful just to have shared a space with me in public. At home, she continued her attempts to charm me. She'd walk around the house in barely their clothing, pretending she wasn't trying to provoke a reaction. I countered her antics with practicality. I adjusted the thermostat, rigging it so the house was cooler than usual. It wasn't petty, it was survival. 2 weeks later, I restored it to normal, but at least I'd made my point. Around 5 months after she was served the divorce papers, Emily announced she'd be having dinner with Cassidy on Saturdays. She asked if I'd mind watching Ethan. I didn't mind. In fact, I welcomed it. I joined a bowling league through my job, and those Saturday nights became my escape. Ethan loved the attention he got from the ladies at the alley, and I loved not sitting at home wondering what Emily was up to. One night, Emily asked if she could join me at the bowling alley. I told her flatly that I only went out when she wasn't home. My honesty upset her, but at this point, I wasn't concerned with how she felt. Pleasing Emily was no longer on my priority list. 6 months later, Beatrice called with frustrating news. Tracy's lawyer had successfully petitioned for mandatory marriage counseling, 10 sessions, 2 per week. I was legally required to attend and had to actively participate. I asked Beatrice if I could answer every question with the same sentence. She said she didn't care what I said, as long as I said something. So, at every session, whenever Tracy or the counselor spoke to me, I repeated one sentence: I don't want to stay married to a promiscuous woman. It was maddening for both of them. The counselor's voice grew sharper with every session. Tracy's face turned red with frustration. But I stayed calm, composed, and unwavering. After the 5th session, the counselor called it quits. She deemed the sessions unproductive and a waste of time. The following months slipped by without much change. I focused on Ethan. He became my world, my priority, my anchor. I knew he felt our bond growing stronger every day. But 4 days before the final divorce hearing, everything unraveled. Emily packed her bags, took Ethan, and disappeared. I was served with a restraining order, accused of unspeakable things, claims of coercion, of violence, of forcing myself on her. Hospital records were included, detailing supposed bruises as evidence. When Beatrice called me with the news, her voice was tight with worry. Tracy was seeking full custody, with only limited, supervised visits for me. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. None of it was true, not a single word. I told Beatrice as much. She sighed. I believe you, Adam. But without evidence, this will be one hell of a fight. This wasn't just a messy divorce anymore. It was war. 2 days after Beatrice warned me not to contact Emily or Ethan under any circumstances, I walked into the house after work to an unexpected sight. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands neatly folded in front of her. Her car was nowhere in sight, which meant she'd likely been dropped off by someone whose name I could easily guess. Instinct told me to turn around and walk right back out. The restraining order hung over me like a guillotine, and one wrong move could snap the rope. But before I could step back outside, she called out, her voice sharp and commanding. Adam, turn around and listen to me. If you want to see Ethan again, you'll hear me out. I froze. My son's name had a way of stopping me cold. Slowly, I turned to face her, keeping my distance and saying nothing. My face remained neutral, my arms crossed. If she was expecting an emotional reaction, she'd be disappointed. She gestured toward my phone. Hand it over. I want it off. I placed my phone on the table. She powered it down, her movements precise and deliberate, making sure no recording was running. Her voice softened slightly as she began speaking. Adam, I tried to reason with you. I tried to talk you down, to make you understand. But you're so stubborn, so impossibly stubborn, that I had to resort to desperate measures. I didn't want to accuse you of those things. But you left me no choice. I had to ensure I'd get full custody of Ethan. She paused, watching for any sign of reaction on my face. I gave her nothing. She continued, her voice steady, almost rehearsed. We both know you'd never lay a hand on me, Adam. I told them that 100 times in my head. But Elliot said I needed leverage, a backup plan in case your lawyer got clever. So I made up a story about you hitting me. And now, here we are. My stomach twisted at her confession, but I remained silent. She was playing her final hand, and she wanted me to see every card. If you cancel the divorce, drop everything, and agree to join our group, if you accept this new arrangement and let things go back to normal, I'll lift the restraining order. We'll move back in together, and Ethan will have both parents under one roof. We can start over, Adam. We can have a marriage that's even better than before. Her voice dipped into something softer, something suggestive. I'll even show you what I've learned. Right here. Right now, if you want. Her smile was the same one she used when trying to get her way, the kind that had worked on me more times than I cared to admit. I stared into her eyes, searching for any trace of remorse, any genuine emotion. There was none. So, I said slowly, if I agree to this circus act you call a marriage, you're saying I'll have full access to Ethan. No conditions, no restrictions. Why would I ever keep a loving father from his son? She said sweetly. Ethan adores you, Adam. He asks for you every day. It breaks my heart to keep him away from you. Her words were so smooth, so carefully crafted, that I almost believed them. Almost. One word, Adam. Just one word, yes, and all of this goes away. We'll be back together, Ethan will have both of us, and everything will fall into place. I couldn't stop the lump forming in my throat as she pressed her advantage. She was hitting me where it hurt the most, my son. Let me think about it, I said flatly. I need time to process, to figure out how to share my wife with other men without wanting to tear my own heart out. Take your time, she purred. But not too much. We're seeing the judge in 2 days. Text me by tomorrow. One word, Adam, yes. If I don't hear from you, I promise you, you'll regret it. Ethan will grow up hating you. I'll make sure of it. With that, she grabbed her purse and walked past me, her confidence radiating off her like heat. I held my breath until I heard the front door close behind her. A quick glance out the window confirmed what I already knew. A sleek, black Lexus had pulled up to the curb, and Elliot Franklin was behind the wheel. He didn't even try to hide it. The two of them drove off, leaving me standing alone in my kitchen. For the rest of the night, her words echoed in my head. Ethan will grow up hating you. She knew exactly where to strike, and she hadn't missed. The next day, Beatrice informed me that my presence at the hearing wasn't required. Legally speaking, my attendance wouldn't change the outcome, but I insisted on being there. I couldn't just sit on the sidelines while my future, and Ethan's, was decided without me. In the courthouse, Emily found me before the session started. Her face twisted into something venomous as she leaned in close. You had your chance, Adam, and you blew it. Your son will never know your name. He'll grow up calling another man Dad. I'll marry someone strong, someone who trusts me, someone who's willing to embrace new experiences, unlike you. Then, in a final act of contempt, she spat in my face before storming away. A few people nearby stared, their expressions a mix of shock and judgment. I didn't care. I wiped my face with a handkerchief, adjusted my tie, and walked into the courtroom. The morning dragged on as one case after another was heard. Our turn didn't come until after lunch. Emily took the stand first, recounting every false accusation with chilling precision. Dates, times, locations, she delivered them all flawlessly, her voice trembling at just the right moments. She was good. Too good. Her attorney painted a picture of me as an unhinged, violent man, driven to jealousy and rage by imagined infidelity. Emily, according to him, had tried everything to save our marriage, but my insecurities had driven her away. It was textbook character assassination. When it was Beatrice's turn, she kept her questions brief. Tracy, are you absolutely certain of the dates, times, and locations of these alleged incidents? Yes, she answered confidently. I even wrote them all down on a calendar. No further questions. Emily looked smug as she stepped down from the stand, certain she had won. Beatrice stood and called her next witness, James McMahon. A plain-looking man in his 40s walked up to the stand and introduced himself as the owner of McMahon Investigative Services. He calmly explained how I had hired him over a year ago to investigate Emily's suspected affair. Under Beatrice's guidance, he presented not only the photos I had shown Emily but additional copies stored securely in his firm's database. They were authenticated and entered into evidence. But James wasn't finished. He revealed that, under his recommendation, surveillance equipment had been installed in our home, cameras, microphones, everything. Emily's attorney shot out of his chair with an objection, but the damage was already done. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, as the weight of the evidence began to shift in my favor. For the first time in weeks, I felt something flicker inside me, hope. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot, the courtroom was a battlefield, and Emily didn't realize she had walked straight into an ambush. Her lawyer confidently objected to the surveillance footage, claiming it was illegally obtained and could have been tampered with. But Beatrice, sharp and unflinching, allowed James McMahon, my private investigator, to methodically dismantle their argument. James explained the surveillance system with precision, detailing how the cameras streamed data directly to a secure cloud server that neither I nor anyone else could access without his firm's oversight. The evidence was untouchable, untampered, and airtight. Judge Feldman nodded in approval, overruling Emily's objection without hesitation. Her lawyer's confident smirk vanished instantly. Then came the real blow. Beatrice presented timestamps, matching Emily's false accusations to the surveillance footage. The recordings showed nothing but a quiet house, Ethan laughing, me cooking dinner, Emily pacing in another room, phone in hand. No arguments, no violence, just a painfully ordinary domestic scene. Her claims unraveled in seconds. But Beatrice wasn't done. A transcript from a phone call Emily made just days before leaving the house was read aloud. In her own words, Emily admitted to fabricating the abuse claims, even suggesting she could have someone rough her up just to make it look convincing. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Her lawyer slumped back in his chair, defeated. When Emily took the stand again, her confidence was gone. Her voice trembled, and her carefully constructed lies crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Beatrice didn't need to press her, Emily had already lost the fight. Judge Feldman delivered his verdict with cold finality. Full custody was awarded to me, with Emily allowed visitation at my discretion. The restraining order was lifted, and I was given sole decision-making authority over Ethan's welfare. Emily was granted minimal alimony, just enough to keep her afloat but not enough to thrive. The judge's parting words were clear: Emily's actions had been manipulative, deceitful, and unforgivable in the eyes of the court. But revenge wasn't complete without the final strike. Outside the courtroom, I handed Emily the address of my new apartment. She tried to apologize, but I cut her off. I revealed my plan to sue her company for fostering an environment where workplace affairs destroyed marriages and families. Her lover, Ronald Hensley, would face public disgrace, professional ruin, and the collapse of his own family life. Emily's face went pale as she realized the depth of the consequences she was about to face. I made one thing clear: I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it because she, and everyone who enabled her, needed to face the consequences of their actions. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift. Ronald was fired. His wife filed for divorce. The company settled quietly for a significant sum, and I used my share to secure a stable life for Ethan and myself. Emily kept her job, her one lifeline, because I had insisted on it. I didn't want Ethan growing up thinking I had left his mother destitute. But she would live in the ruins of her choices, carrying the weight of her betrayal every single day. Looking back, I felt no joy in winning. Victory in a courtroom isn't the same as peace in your heart. But Ethan was safe, and my future was mine to rebuild. What about you? If you were in Adam's shoes, would you have handled it the same way? Would you have shown restraint, or would you have pursued revenge until the very end? Share your thoughts, I'm curious to know.